Hi, I'm Steve Sellers. I am the writer of White Druid and Michael Nero, as well as Guardians of Elayim. We will be discussing the second title now, Guardians, and we'll be looking specifically about mapping the multiverse. We talked a little bit about the setup for Guardians in my last video. This time we're going to be looking more into the world building, into what the Guardians do, exactly how it works, a little bit more about the background and about the places that we'll be looking at least in brief. So we're going to be talking about that. Now I do want to kind of go into a little bit of a reminder if you don't remember last time. You can check the previous video if you really want to look more into that. But since we're going to be talking a little bit more about the world building, I think it kind of makes sense to go back and revisit what they do. The Guardians of Elayim, for those of you coming in new, is a team of characters that have basically witnesses to the crucifixion of Jesus, or in the case of their leader, Marius Longinus, actually was involved in causing the crucifixion. And now, because of the mistake that causes, it disrupts time in various ways. So what happens is they have to go back to these various times and places and fix the fractures that they have caused to time and space. And this is ultimately what they're doing. So in a sense, Guardians of Elayim is a little bit of Quantum Leap, a little bit of Exiles, a little bit of Doctor Who, those sorts of stories. Legends of Tomorrow, that kind of thing. So we want to think about going back to that. And today is Easter as I'm recording this, and I think that's a good time to really discuss this because the crucifixion is at the center of everything that happens here, because the death of Jesus ultimately is the catalyst. So we're going to go ahead and kind of look a little bit about that. And I hope you all are having a good day as we talk about this. Okay. So we want to kind of keep in mind that the death of Jesus reverberates throughout the timeline. They have a big impact on time and space. Because of the sheer significance of who he is, and because of the sheer amount of power that he holds within him, the cosmic significance of this person. Okay. But because Marius, who is the team leader, ends up delivering the blow, he is the one that wounds Jesus by essentially hitting him with a lance, is essentially what he's known for. And because of that, this is the catalyst that sends things badly for time. Okay. But ultimately, it's a second chance for them to be the Guardians, to do this. Because ultimately what it is that the angels have chosen these people who were the witnesses at this moment, who were present at this time, because of various things that they know, or because of their skills, or whatever, they have been chosen to go back and set right what once went wrong today. Okay. Again, we want to talk about the Elayim tree. We discussed it last time, but I think it's kind of important to go back and look at it again. The Elayim tree, think of it as kind of Yggdrasil. It's actually the spawn of Yggdrasil, or a successor to Yggdrasil. It works in much the same way. It is a tree that connects worlds. It is a tree that branches off into various times and various places. And because of that, it must be preserved. And ultimately, there should be a single branch, but because of what the Guardians did and other factors, which we'll eventually talk about, it doesn't work out that way. And time fractures. There are different branches. Okay, so we want to keep that in mind. As far as the tree itself, the original tree, Yggdrasil, was around since the dawn of man, the first age of man, the same time as the Guardian of Eden, the same time as Deucalion Pyrrha, the first age of Zeus, around that time period. So we want to kind of think about the largest significance of that. And then ultimately the original Yggdrasil ended up dying in part because of the curse of God, or El as we call him, in the Omen verse. Okay, so ultimately we want to keep in mind that the fall of man, the temptation of the garden, and all of this leads to the tree itself, the original tree itself, dying and having to be replaced. In addition to that, there is also a massive war that happens not that long after that in cosmic terms. And ultimately, there is a war between the great Black Dragon Lord, who is a little bit more prominent, I think, in Finlong and the Albino Warrior. But ultimately, you know, we're probably not going to get too deep into that into the series itself, but just keep in mind that is a background element. But there is a war between this being and the Order of Druids, between the various godly pantheons, the Orders of Druid, which Luo Shi from Druid and Nero ultimately hails from. So all these are connected, you know. And I talked a little bit about this in the last video. Just kind of keep in mind that that's still a factor. Okay. Okay. Now, so again, this tree is the replacement tree, but ultimately now it's contaminated because of the crucifixion, and it is such a momentous, impactful event that it fractures throughout time and space in the various worlds. So this actually ends up creating a lot of different worlds, in addition to things in time and space that need to be corrected. Now we'll get into time travel and how it works in the context of Guardians. So, you know, you want to keep in mind that these characters really don't know anything that we know about quantum physics or about time travel or any of these things. And in fact, they probably would never even have thought of the concept back then. We're talking about 7 people who come from the reign of Emperor Tiberius in the early Roman Empire. He was the second Roman emperor. And so this is ultimately the world they come from. So, you know, they'll have some scientific knowledge here and there, but they really don't know anything about this stuff. So ultimately, this is where the angels come in, because they do know about these things, and they are able to provide certain information and all of that. And they also provide the mechanism by which these characters will be going through time in the different worlds. The main implement by which this happens is a bracelet that each of them will be bestowed. It is a mark that they are a guardian. It is also, in a sense, a chain to heaven in a roundabout way. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. It gives them, you know, certain abilities, but it also has a cost, and we're going to find out. Talk a little bit more about that. The bracelets themselves are made of Mytherium, and if you've been reading up with Omen, you're going to probably recognize that name, because that is the metal of which Frank Wade's armor is made of. So it is Mytherium armor that he wears, but that is designed as weapons-grade angelic technology. What the Guardians have is travel technology. It is not designed to be offensive. It is designed to allow them to move freely through the worlds and through time and space, and to allow them certain abilities to make that more seamless, which we'll get into. And partially, and yes, I will admit from the start that some of these abilities that they have are designed to make things a little bit easier on me, because I do not want to have to deal with answering questions of why they know the language in every single place that they go to. I mean, even modern day Earth, if they came over here, they would not understand anything, because English did not exist back then. So, you know, keep in mind a lot of them were speaking in Latin when we first see them. And ultimately, what we hear, what they hear is probably going to be either Latin or whatever language they're most familiar with. All right. The bracelets themselves are thought-directed. Okay. They're not precise, though. So if you think that what's going to happen is that they're going to pull a trick like in the TARDIS, where they can go back like 5 minutes, not going to happen. That's not how it works. They're going to be generally taken to the general vicinity of where they need to be, but it's not going to be precise. It's not going to take them exactly when and where it has to be. They have to go to a general area. They need to figure out what's going on. They need to interpret the information that the bracelets give them, and that's going to be a little tricky, because these are mortals using these items. Okay, so mortals are using weapons designed for gods, basically, or angels, you know, but they're celestial beings, however you want to put it. Okay, now we want to keep in mind that it does give them certain abilities. It gives them limited ability to blend in. So there's going to be a minor illusion that most mortal beings will be able to see. So they will, to as far as the casual observer who doesn't know them is concerned, they don't stand out at all. They're just another face in the crowd. They look just like them. They're just not going to think about it. It's much like a perception filter in the Doctor Who universe, where the Doctor may, occasionally blind onlookers or something, or like the psychic paper, where it'll present an illusion of what they expect to see. That's kind of how it works. It's that limited mental influence, but that's all it really does. That and the translation function. And there are some other abilities, but keep in mind that the illusions will not work on everyone, because one of the major differences between this series and your typical time-space kind of thing is that there is the presence of mystical beings and gods and angels and all of these beings, and they're not going to be fooled by this illusion. This is designed to fool basically the native population, mortals. So these are people who are infiltrating that, but in the end, they're going to be people that will be able to see through them, and that's going to present problems if they're not careful. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and the bracelets will also help show the Guardians what the fracture is and where that is. Generally, it's going to give them visions, things like that. Just signs that they'll be able to see that will guide them where they need to go. But in the end, it's still heavenly technology, trying to infiltrate its way into a mortal brain, and mortals cannot comprehend all the things that the celestial beings can. So beings like the angels can use it a bit more reliably, we can't. And the Guardians certainly will not be able to, because they're all human beings. So we're going to see other things as well. Again, keep in mind that not all of this is going to be beneficial to the Guardians, because the angels are also using it to keep track of the Guardians and what they do. They're also going to have certain functions by which they restrain them. So we're going to see a little bit of that around the second issue, is what I'm thinking. You're going to see that there definitely are conditions attached, and they do not have free reign to do everything they want to do. They are doing this under the guiding light of heaven, and in particular, two particular people that will be watching over them and making sure that they're honest, which will be a trick, because some of these people in the Guardians are not very honest at all. So now we'll talk a little bit about the worlds of the Omen multiverse and all of this. Obviously, of course, there is the regular Omen verse that various titles that we've already released take place in. Druid and Nero take place in this Omen verse. Frank Wade and Omen, the Gallows Men, all these other characters that are going to be coming along. This is where everything's set. So this is the world of Kingdom City and all of this. It is an alternate timeline from the world that we know. There is a definite demarcation point that sets Kingdom City apart from the rest of the multiverse. That is definitely something that I plan to explore eventually. Okay. There's what Michael not only likes to call the Terranverse, or Earth Mundane, or however you want to put it, and that is basically, think of it like Earth Prime in the DC multiverse, where you have this world that is just the world outside your window, nothing strange about it. Okay, the only difference is that our characters can visit it. That's it. So this is the world that we recognize. This is the, with our history, everything that you and I know. So, and it might be that we'll be seeing this, and I would say there's certainly going to be one instance where going to the Terranverse is going to probably happen, because there is one particular event that needs to be set right, and that particular thing is very key in terms of distinguishing our world from Kingdom City. So I would say definitely expect to see that at some point down the road. Maybe late down the road, but I would definitely expect to see it. There's the world of Era. Consider this like basically the medieval fantasy world. Consider it like our Middle Earth or our Kryn, or whatever D&D world that you happen to understand. So this is the world of elves and dwarves and orcs and trolls and all those sorts of things. It is a world that is highly magically concentrated. So one of the main differences between a lot of these worlds is how much magic it is charged with it. So you kind of consider it a spectrum. So there's not really much magic in the Terranverse. There is more magic in Kingdom City. There is more magic in Era. Okay, so obviously this is a world where spell casting is going to be more of a thing, and this is going to be a time and a place where I would say Nazrin particularly is going to be more useful because she does know a lot about mysticism and those sorts of things. I would also say Rivka is going to find out that she's going to be able to do things that she can't do normally too. So the characters that have a little bit more mystic background, or at least with more of an esoteric background, are going to be much more useful there, as opposed to some place like the Terranverse where they're pretty much going to be more normal. So that's going to be one of those things. Yeah, a lot of the stuff, we've outlined a fair amount of what's going on with Era. I'm going to kind of leave the basic political structure and things like that maybe for another video at some point, but because it's not one of those things. It's going to take a while to explain, and I would say we'll hold on with that. Beyond that, we have Heaven and the Heavenly City. It's also where the Guardians' base of operations is going to be, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this video. I think that there's some interesting bits about that, but just kind of keep in mind that Heaven is just the walled city, where that is, and just going to keep that in mind. There's also Hell in the Abyss on the other side of things. I would say we're probably not going to visit that immediately. Maybe down the road, but not immediately. Certainly, the way we have it described is that, except for two specific points, it is a pitch black area of darkness. So it is completely devoid of light. It is the void, more or less. It's more complicated than that, but just bear the basics in mind. There is also the Bottomless Pit, which is another world. This is mainly designed as a prison for the gods. So there are gods that have been placed in there probably because they're massive threats to some various degrees. And that's going to be one we're going to have to wait on, I think, before we really get into that. But just be aware it exists. And then beyond that, there are also the 9 divine houses. And you can kind of look at it in terms of clans, but I would say there are also, some of these are also definite places that can be visited. They're definitely connected to Kingdom City particularly. So, obviously, you have Asgard, you have the world of the Norse gods. You have the Greek house, which is the Olympians, Mount Olympus, Tartarus, these various places that exist in that mythology. Tir na Nog, which is the Celtic pantheon where they live, and we're going to see a little bit of Tir na Nog in a White Druid story that I currently have in the works. We'll see when that comes out, but definitely Tir na Nog will be in the background, and we'll see a little bit of the background of that place and how that place works. There's definitely going to be certain world building elements in that story that I do eventually want to get to. Yes, there's also the Egyptian house, which is where Thoth comes from. You may recall, if you've seen the previous video, that we talked a little bit about Thoth and how he's going to be a recurring player because he's someone who's trying to keep track of the Guardians for his own reasons. He is very information driven and has this need to know things. And this will get him, to a certain extent, in conflict with the Guardians, but it's kind of a complex relationship he'll have with them. He is also our main narrator. So we want to keep in mind that Heliopolis, as it's sometimes called, that's going to be something that we may very possibly see at various points in the series. There's also the Chinese house. I'm kind of calling it Huangtian, or forgive me if I'm butchering that. It's meant to be either Yellow Heaven or Shining Heaven in the Chinese mythology. And the reason I'm kind of using that name is just to distinguish it from the heaven of the Abrahamic mythology that we're looking at. And then, of course, Heaven and Hell are the remaining divine houses, and of course we've discussed those two a little bit. Now, we'll get into the Sanctuary. The Sanctuary is the little slice of heaven that has been reserved for the Guardians, and they have been set apart from the rest of heaven for various reasons, which we'll talk about. Okay. Now, keep in mind that most of this is going to be designed in the Roman style, and basically a large part of it is this is an area that has been designated off limits to mostly all but the Shakor, which is the organization in the angelic circles that is taking care of the Guardians. Okay. So it looks basically like a Roman setup. It's going to have all those sorts of Roman pillars and things like this. And this is mainly designed to acclimate the Guardians so that they don't completely freak out. Because they kind of recognize that the human mind has its limitations. And it's going to be, to a certain extent, patronizing, because we're talking about angels. So we're going to be looking at this. Now, individual rooms within the sanctuary will be assigned to them, and those rooms will be more specific to the characters. So Marius, for example, being a Roman centurion, will have more of a sparse, Spartan, Roman-like room, with the household gods, and well, maybe not those, but those sorts of things that you would expect to see there. Nazarene will probably have more of a Persian aesthetic, more like a royal suite. So it's very much designed to be a room designed for each one of them and their particular priorities. And in a sense, it's a gilded cage for them as well. They're not really free to move around. It is a prison, but it is a soft prison. They are ultimately working off a horrible debt, particularly Marius. So this is where a lot of that comes from. Yeah. And they also have wardens. And there are two angels, particularly members of the Shakor, who are going to be looking out for them. The first is going to be the Archangel Uriel. Uriel's going to be one of those interesting people. He's one of those people who really does believe in God's plan, like really believes. But he's not one of those people who makes a huge thing of it. He is very cool and reserved. He is, very polished and professional, and doesn't really admit very much to what's on his mind or what he's really feeling at any given moment. And considering that he works within the angelic hierarchy, you can kind of understand why. This is not, he has a certain regard for humans, but, he's not somebody who's going to be dealing with them that much on a day-to-day basis. He's just basically, he kind of serves the higher-ups. He is the person who is set over time. That is his role and his function. He works under the Archangel Gabriel in this role, but he has many other aspects that he takes care of. But for the purpose of what we're looking at, he's kind of answers to Gabriel, who has that particular authority. And, Uriel takes care of the time travel problems. Okay. The person that we're going to be seeing probably the most with respect to that is Uriel's assistant, Phanuel, who is mythologically associated with Uriel, and sometimes is regarded as kind of an alternate name for him. But I thought it might be interesting to have a separate character, because I just don't think that Uriel is going to be the kind of person to hands-on deal with everything that they do. He is an archangel. He has higher purposes that he answers to, and he's not going to be spending half of his time, dealing with these crazy mortals that are jumping dimensions and doing foolish things with their tech. That's not what he is going to be doing most of the time. But he will be keeping an eye on them, because that is part of his job description, as it were. But Phanuel is the person who handles everything on a day-to-day basis. She's not very fond of the Guardians. She's not very fond of humans. I wouldn't say fond of humans in general, but I would say she's not fond of these humans, particularly because they all have problems of various kinds. Particularly people like Abash, particularly people like Renan. These are not people that she is particularly crazy about at first. That may change, of course, because you never know. Yeah, but in a sense, the sanctuary is kind of a prison block for them. It is just that it is kind of a gilded cage to kind of encourage them to be more productive in the task that's been assigned to them. Let's put it that way. That could always change, of course, depending on Uriel's disposition that day. But I would say right now it is in their best interest to kind of humor them a little bit and acclimate them a little bit until they know the ropes. Oh, yes, just be aware that the bracelets are also attuned to the sanctuary and will send them back there. The angels can also call them back if they want to. So if they think that the Guardians have really screwed up, they can always call them back and, tell them whatever they have to say and get on with it. So, but also keep in mind that when they do jump, when they come back, it's going to be like no time has passed at all. So when we're talking about, so time will pass a little bit differently in the sanctuary, and they'll do whatever they have to do, and then they come back. That is an advantage in some respects. It is also not an advantage when you have the angels that are very unhappy because you screwed up. And we may see a little bit of that explored as well, because they're not going to get everything right the first time. All right. So with that in mind, I think we'll go ahead and leave it here. I think I have talked your ears off enough for one day. So I hope you all have a good day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to consider Omen Comics and to consider, this video. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's been something that will help you think about, whether or not this is a book that you would be interested in getting. Thank you very much. This is Steve with Omen Comics, signing off.